Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is David Coutts. I'm the head of the School of Mathematical and Physical Sciences, not School of Natural Sciences, but I'm doing the introductions today. But if I can work this, we'll begin with the, take that out, we have a welcome to country, hopefully queued up somewhere here. Thank you, Kira.
Welcome. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Macquarie University land, the Warramargal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We welcome people of all nations and all faiths. Kwai Bidja, Jamna Payala Janawi. Come here, we speak together. We have 60,000 years of archaeological evidence of Aboriginal habitation at Lake Mungo and 20,000 years in Ryde. We have great antiquity. Today, hundreds of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduate from Macquarie University. The Darug Nation had famous leaders such as Chief Yarramundi, Naraginji, Colby and Maria Locke. Many of the descendants of these Darug people live today amongst you. We celebrate with you our ongoing attachment and custodianship of this country. We celebrate the achievements of Macquarie University.
So I think it's always impressive to be reminded of the great antiquity of our First Nations people here in Australia. And of course, today's lecture will further remind us of what antiquity can mean as well. So welcome to the Faculty of Science and Engineering and welcome to this evening's lecture, which is part of our Discover lecture series. I think a few people have been to these many times before, but hopefully we have some new guests here today. So these monthly talks are an opportunity for our research leaders to share with us the wonder and excitement of their scientific discoveries and innovations. So the Discover series comes from the three words that we use to define what our faculty is about. That is discover, create, and innovate. So those words capture our commitment to pushing the boundaries of knowledge, shaping new ideas into practical solutions, and driving meaningful change. So Discover reflects our pursuit of understanding the world around us, and we'll have that in abundance today. Create speaks to the hands-on application of that knowledge to solve real-world problems. And Innovate represents our forward-looking vision, transforming ideas into technologies and breakthroughs that shape the future. So these are the principles that drive our research, our teaching, and what we strive to instill in our students every day. So today we'll be hearing one of our research stars, Associate Professor Kira Westaway. So Kira is a geochronologist, recognised for her use of luminescence dating to establish when humans evolved and dispersed across Asia to Australia. Very deep and fundamental questions about our humanity. Kira started her journey at Macquarie University 17 years ago, where she established the first luminescence dating laboratory for the Greater Sydney region. So through this facility, Kira has developed two new disciplines in the Science and Engineering faculty. That is geochronology through luminescence dating and human evolution and dispersal. These are very closely linked interests. Since 2008, Kira has established Macquarie as a leader in geochronological studies of human evolution by working on a number of important human sites in Asia, such as Liang Gua in Flores in Indonesia, Tam Pa Ling and Cobra Cave in northern Laos, and Nyangdong in Java. I'm probably mangling those names, which I'm sure she'll be telling us about in her talk today. Her research helps us define who we are as humans, our origins, our struggles, our survival, and our achievements. She has changed how we classify humans by breaking down the assumption of brain size and intelligence. And she has helped us recognize the surprising achievements of early hominins as they adapted to often harsh environments on their dispersal through Asia. Kira is committed to making this science accessible to the public by developing a concerted media strategy with TV and radio interviews, public blogs, YouTube videos, websites, and has really been phenomenal in public engagement in her research. For example, her latest giant ape Nature paper had a potential reach of over 2.7 billion people across the globe. In her presentation this evening, I'm sure Kira will challenge us to think about our very existence, looking into why some species in humanity's family tree died out and why others, ourselves, have thrived through environmental and climate challenges. So please give a very warm welcome to Associate Professor Kira Westaway.
Thank you so much, David. That was an amazing introduction. I might frame that, take it home with me. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I'm just going to get rid of this and go on to this. There we go. Okay, so tonight I want to talk to you about something that's really close to everybody's hearts, ourselves. And with the challenges that we face in the world today, with climate change challenges and political unrest and all the things that humans face, there's a message here that I think that we all really need to hear. Okay, so listen carefully and we'll have a little look. Okay, so why were we so good at adapting while our primate relatives faced extinction? So I want to start by everybody looking at the people next to you. Have a look at the people around you or in front of you or behind you or next to you. And you have an appreciation of how different everybody is. So we've got different hair colours, people have different eye colours, maybe different skin tones, different body shapes, different ethnicity. Everybody looks quite different. But despite all these differences, we are one species, Homo sapiens. And as Homo sapiens, we are winners. Do you know why we're winners? Because we've been the sole surviving human species on this planet for the last 40,000 years. We won. We got the planet. This is it. This is all ours, okay? But it wasn't always like this. If you go back 50 or 100,000 years, the landscape looks very different, okay? So we have Homo sapiens, here's Homo sapiens down here, in couple of locations that I'm going to talk about later, but we also have a lot of human diversity. So we'll start with the little people. This is Homo floresiensis from a cave in Indonesia. We have Homo luzonensis from Laos cave in the Philippines, all both very, very small people. I'm going to show you how small a bit later. We also had Homo erectus, who we find in a river terrace in Nangdong in Java. And not a human, but definitely in the primate family, we have Gigantopithecus blacki, the largest ape to ever walk the planet, okay? So the landscape looked very, very different. But, spoiler alert, they all went extinct apart from us, Homo sapiens. So what makes us so different? Why did we survive and these amazing species all went extinct? What were we doing differently that helped us to survive? Now, the answer to that question, the way that we can answer that question is by looking at these past unresolved extinctions. Why did these species go extinct? What was driving these extinctions? And if we can work out what made them extinct, we can work out what we were doing at that time that allowed us to survive. And then we can start to really appreciate how good we were at adapting and surviving in these situations, okay? So we are going to now have a look at some of these species. So our first contestant in the race for survival is Homo floresiensis, okay? Now this was the little people. I call them little because literally this is how big they were. 1 meter tall, pretty much comes up to my hip bone. About the same height as a 3-year-old child. So you can imagine when we first found them, we thought it was a child. We were convinced, but then as they took the bones out of the excavation, we could see that the wisdom teeth were fully erupted at the back. They were completely out. So this was not a child. This was a fully grown human. Okay, so very, very small. Over here. Okay, so here is the skeleton as we found it. If you notice, it's an almost complete skeleton, which is very rare. Sometimes you find one bone or a tooth or something, almost complete, just missing a few rib bones, top part of the arm and a few little hand bones there. But look at the detail of all the bones in the feet, pretty much all of the bones there. So an amazing, amazing discovery. 20 years ago, makes me feel really old, but it was 20 years ago that we found her. We found her in this cave. This is called Liang Bua, which means cool cave in the local Macquarie language. And you definitely recognize that. When you walk up the hill, you get really hot. And then you get to the top and you walk inside the cave and it drops about 10, 15 degrees the minute you walk in. And it's a lovely place to hang out. So you can see why she liked to live there and occupy that area. Now, on the left here, you can see what's like inside the cave during excavations. You can see all the sectors being dug here. And on the right, we just have a reconstruction. Sorry about the nudity, but obviously hominins don't really wear clothes. So we had to make it as real as possible. But you can see here, these are the excavations. They go down very deep, sometimes 15 meters or so. The only reason we can go deep is because we learned how to do a technique called shoring, which is putting wood around the outside, similar to how they do when they dig a grave. And actually, one of my professors actually went on a grave digging course before they went out to do these excavations so that they could do the shoring to get down to the depths that we're looking at. Now, when I say deep, I mean really deep. I mean, if you go down 10 meters in water, you think, oh yeah, 10 meters, but 10 meters in sediment like that, it's a long way down, I can tell you. So just for scale, I don't know if you can see my cursor, yes you can. Can you see it up there? Yeah, these are people at the top there. Yeah, so it's a long way down and very complex sediments and really difficult to work out what's really going on. So big complexity there in sediments. Now in 2004, this is a plan of the cave. And these red dots here are the excavations that we do. Bearing in mind that these are 3 by 3 meters holes. They take a whole good 3 months to dig or so. It takes a long time. So in 2004, this is our understanding of the sediments in the cave. But by 2012, you can see that we had dug a lot more and we had a much, much better understanding of what was going on. And this is really important because there was a huge difference in our understanding between these two periods. So going back to the original dating in 2004, this is what we call a sector. This is just the site that the area, the pit that we dug. And this is north, south, east, and west, but laid flat, so you can actually see all the sediments. And you can see there's some quite nice sort of layering there. We use some dating techniques to help us understand exactly what the timing is. Because when you're looking at extinction, you have to get the timing right. If you don't get the time at which it died out or went extinct right, then you're looking for clues as to the causes at the wrong time period, and you get thrown, okay? So getting the dating right is really crucial. As I always tell my students, timing is everything. They know that one. I tell them that all the time. Okay, so we've got some radiocarbon dating. So radiocarbon just dates something that was alive and then died. So we could date charcoal, because that was a tree that was alive and then it died, okay? We also have a technique called U-series dating. You know how in caves you get stalagmites and stalactites, you know, those kind of nice cave formations? So we get also exactly like that, but it flows flat over a rock, and that's called flowstone. So we can date that with a technique called U-series dating. But the best technique in the world, and I have my students down here, they can testify to that, luminescence dating, and this dates minerals that we find in the sediments. Okay, and what you're doing, you're not dating how old the mineral is, you're dating when it was last exposed to sunlight. So before it gets deposited in the cave, it's out on the landscape, and the signal gets reset to 0 when it's in the sunlight. Then it gets buried in the cave, and the signal starts to build up. And we can tell exactly how long it's been since it was deposited in the cave. So it's a really fantastic technique. So we did some luminescence dating to get an age for the base. And there's the location of the skeleton. And there's some more luminescence ages, and that's from the radiocarbon age, 18,000, and then going up, all the way up to the top. Now, this photo here, I love this photo, mainly because we both look really young. But the other reason I love this photo is there we are, taking a luminescence sample right at the bottom, so the ages you just saw, okay? Now, I'm looking very happy. I'm about to leave. I've just taken a sample, and I'm going back to Australia. I've done 3 months at the site, had a great time, learned a lot, and I was just about to wrap it up. I get back to Australia, and I walk into my supervisor's office, and they're like, they found a skeleton. And I was like, what? They said, where you were sampling, they found a skeleton. And I'm like, hang on a minute, because I'm sitting on a mound. You can see I'm sitting on a little seat, but there's a mound of sediment underneath me. And I was like, it wasn't in that top corner. They're like, yeah, I was sitting on this species of human right there. So that's a really amazing photo for me. But anyway, so we took the sample, they found the skeleton. And then obviously we tried to date it. Now at the time, Thomas Sutnecker, who runs the excavations, when we got the age of 18,000, he always said, there's a problem with the age. He said, I think the dating is correct. It's the association between the ages and the actual material that's the problem. Okay, so this is a big problem in dating. So this is all of the excavation that we know now, but at the time, we only knew this bit in the middle. And you can see that these green little stars are where we took the carbon-14 results. And this here is where we found the skeleton. And at that time, 2004, we had an age of 18,000 to 12,000. So because we had this age, we had to try and work out what probably caused the extinction. And we knew that there was some volcanic activity. You can see this volcanic sediment, this grey layering at the top here, that's directly over the top of the Hobbit layer. We thought maybe it was a volcanic eruption. Maybe that's what caused their extinction. Okay? But then, after another 10 years of excavations, takes a long time to excavate, Thomas noticed, I don't know if you can see this black line all the way down. And he said it looks like this is what we call an erosion contact, where something has been removed and something been replaced inside it. So we started to look into the idea that maybe this wasn't as it first appeared. So we did a redate. So again, we had the U-series and the luminescence, but this time we did some U-series dating on the actual Hobbit bones. I don't know if you can see, there's tiny little holes all the way across the bone. So we were dating the actual bone itself. And we also did some dating of the volcanic material that we knew about as well, okay? So we did a lot more dating to try and really understand what's going on. And again, this is what we knew in 2004. This gave us an age of 18,000 to 12,000. So then we assumed, or maybe modern humans didn't arrive until about 10,000, and potentially the cause of extinction could have been this big volcanic eruption. Maybe they weren't very good at surviving volcanic eruptions and all the ash on the landscape and all of those kind of changes. But what we discovered was that the Hobbit material was actually coming out of this green sediment, it's not green, but this green bank of sediment that's coloured here. Almost like a pedestal, if you can imagine that the Hobbit bones were actually protruding out or eroded out of this older bank, and then the younger sediment filled it. So it looked like the younger sediment was the burial sediment, and in fact it wasn't. The actual burial sediment was this green bank of pedestal material that you can see behind it. So when we dated that, and then of course we get the younger infill. So you could see why we made that mistake. But by opening up the excavation, we got a better idea of what was going on. So when we dated this older material, guess what? It came out 60 to 50,000. Very different age range than we originally thought. And this completely changed our ideas about what caused the extinction. So now it looks like the boundary between Homo floresiensis and modern humans is much closer than we realized. We know now that modern humans arrived at the site about 47,000, and by 50,000, the hobbits had already gone extinct. So maybe it was the interaction with modern humans that caused the extinction, and maybe this competition was more significant than we realized. There was also a significant vegetation collapse around 60,000, which could have led to their extinction. So probably a lot more vulnerable to climate and environmental changes than we realized, and definitely nothing to do with volcanic eruptions. So by getting the correct timeline, you can see we've kind of really changed our understanding of what caused their extinction. Okay, so our next contestant in the race to survival is Homo erectus. So this is a very large Homo erectus, but you get the idea. Graciously poised, so you can't see too much. So Homo erectus here, we know from an island, Java island in Indonesia. So this isn't a cave site. This is actually what we call a river terrace. Now, a river terrace is just an old floodplain, and the river has got really energized and has eroded down into that floodplain and left it like a step. And what happens in landscapes that are really active, volcanically active, they start to create terraces that go down and steps all the way down. Now, the Homo erectus material was excavated in the 1930s by the Dutch. You can see these are the old original excavation photos. And they found 12 skull caps, so the top part of the skull of Homo erectus. And this is the youngest Homo erectus ever found anywhere. So this really is the linking into why erectus went extinct. Now, this site has always caused problems with dating. Most people try to focus on dating the fossils themselves, and there's all sorts of problems. And myself, as a geomorphologist, I kind of try to understand the landscape. So we thought a new approach was definitely required. So what we did was look at the landscape, because we know the landscape's changing around the site. If we can work out the sequence of landscape changes, maybe we can use that to kind of constrain the site. We also knew that we could date these terraces. And if we can date the terraces, we can date the site. And we also wanted to do a much better job at trying to date the fossils as well. So firstly, the landscape. Now, originally, the Solo River that created these terraces used to flow to the south in Java. And then these southern mountains down here, called Gunung Siwu, started to uplift these limestone mountains, and it diverted the river, could no longer flow to the south. So it started to flow up to the north through what we call the Kendeng, it was Kendeng Depression then, and flow through out to the north. And then the Kendeng Hills started to uplift as well. Everything's very active in Java. So the Kendeng Hills started to uplift, and then as the river got lots of energy, it's eroding down and it started to create these terraces. So if we could date the uplift of the southern mountains, that gives us an age range then of when the terraces could have formed. So that's the landscape component. We also looked at dating the river terraces. So you can see this is the Nangdong terrace, the Homo erectus terrace right here. And this can be constrained by the terrace above it and the terrace below it. So Nangdong can't be any older than the terrace above it, and it can't be any younger than the terrace below it. So by dating these terraces, we can effectively sandwich the age of the site. And we also looked at the fossils themselves. Now, this is a map of the river terrace. The dark blue area, the blue area that you can see, is all the excavations conducted by the Dutch. They pretty much took out the whole river terrace, as you can see. Now, previous people who've gone to this site have gone and excavated and found some evidence and dated it and got the wrong age. And the reason they're getting the wrong age is because they're digging where the Dutch had dug, thinking it was original sediment. And it's not, it's what we call backfill. So when you dig up, see that big pile behind that man there? When you dig, you leave a big pile and then you put all the sediment back, and that's what we call backfill. Now you think, surely you'd know you were digging in backfill, but actually when you've left backfill for a few, like 50 years or so, it actually just looks like normal sediments. So it's actually quite hard to tell that you're not digging in original material. So we were able to get the plans of what the Dutch dug in the 30s, and we could actually excavate along this yellow bit here, which is the original sediments. So we had a much better job at actually dating. Now, this is quite a complex figure, but I'm going to walk you through it. Okay, so at the top, we've got the landscape context. Remember the uplift of those southern mountains? And that gives us a maximum age for the site. So there's no way that Nang Dong can be any older than that, the uplift of those Gunung Siwu, okay? Then we have the river terraces, and here we have the Nang Dong terrace, constrained by the upper and the lower. And then over here is the fossils. Now this layer C, this is the layer containing all the Homo erectus material. So if we put this all together, we get an age of 117 to 108,000 for the entire site, backed up by all the evidence that you can see. So we know that between 117 and 108,000, erectus just completely disappeared from Nang Dong, which is the youngest site in the world, so it effectively went extinct. And because we know this now, we can build a timeline for Homo erectus. So we know that there was an uplift of the mountains before 500,000. Then we get the river diverted north. And then the Solar River flows through the Kendeng Hills and makes the first terrace around 300,000. And then it makes the terrace above Nang Dong. And then there was a large environmental event. Now, we don't know what that event is. We're going to do a lot more work to try and find out, looking at faunal teeth to try and work out what this large environmental event was. But it caused a mass death. So there's lots of carcasses dead all over the landscape. These were all gathered up by a large flood. We don't think the flood was the actual thing that killed them. Definitely something before them killed them. Large flood picks them up, all these carcasses, and transports them downstream. Now, Nang Dong is right on a corner. So you know how sometimes in streams you get like a log jam where you get lots of logs and things get caught in it, usually rubbish, but other things like that. Well, these carcasses all got caught in this log jam. I call it a carcass jam. And it created a really dense bone bed so that we had lots of fossils all in one space, and that's how we got 12 skull caps of Homo erectus. So now that we kind of know a timeline, we can see that Homo erectus was actually a lot more vulnerable to climate changes, and it was very much living in an ecosystem that was on its way out. It's very ancient fauna, and when we get the influx of rainforest, it was almost living in a refugia that completely broke apart. So a lot more sensitive and vulnerable to landscape changes. Our next contestant on the race for survival, the largest ever primate to walk the planet. So we've gone from the smallest ever human to the largest ever primate. So we're talking 3 meters tall. It's pretty big. And it was found in southern China. Now, this is what we call karst landscape, limestone landscape that creates these amazing towers that protrude right up in the landscape. And what we love about these landscapes is they are riddled with caves, so many caves in them, so much evidence we can't even get to. There's just so many caves. And because of that, it preserves everything that was on the landscape. So everything that was on the landscape, all the animals, everything that was living there, eventually dies and gets washed into these caves and gets preserved inside these caves. Now, the giganto material, I'm going to call him giganto instead of Gigantopithecus, a little bit long, was first found by von Koningswald. He was looking through a drugstore in Hong Kong, and he got sold those 2 teeth at the top as dragon teeth. And he knew they weren't dragon teeth. He knew they were primates. But he got hold of them, and that was the start of the whole story about Giganto. Now, when we excavate, we don't excavate with little paintbrushes like you do on Indiana Jones. This is with picks and hammers and jackhammers, because the sediments are incredibly hard. They're just like rock, and we have to bash through them to try and find all the fossils. So very different sort of excavating than you'd be used to. So this is Gigantopithecus blacki. It is a primate, like our other fellow primates here, but unlike mountain gorillas and chimpanzees, it's actually related to an orangutan. So they've done some so looking at the old proteins, and they've worked out it's more related to an orangutan than anything else, okay? And if we look at the primate family tree, so we can see there's orangutan. So you can see Gigantopithecus was an early offshoot of the orangutan branch. There we have gorillas and chimpanzees, and then humans as well. So it's a relative of humans, but not an ancestor. So we haven't been derived from, because that's obviously an early offshoot. Now, to establish the extinction of Giganto, why did this mighty beast, the king of the jungle, why did it disappear? To do this, we had to look at a number of cave sites to work out when an animal or a species goes extinct across a landscape. You can't just take evidence from one cave. You need multiple caves. So we looked at 22 caves in all. And we can't just look at the caves that have Giganto evidence. You need to also look at the caves that don't have Giganto evidence. So you can work out exactly when it drops out the fossil record. So on the left here, you can see just examples of the caves. These are 3D models of the caves. So you get a feel for what it's like actually in these caves. These caves have been, you can see the steps, they've been quite well excavated. And over here is what we call a breccia, which is a cave deposit that contains all the fossils. So everything from the landscape gets washed into these caves. They get preserved by these really hard rock flow stones above it, and it saves these breccia units. Again, we've got U-series, we've got a technique here that can date the teeth, and then luminescence as well. So all about the timing. Now, again, another complex figure, but I'll walk you through it. Okay, so down the bottom, we have all of the names of the caves. So these are all the caves down the bottom. The green caves over this side here are all caves that contain Giganto, and these caves over here are all caves that don't contain Giganto. Evidence, that is. Up the side here, we have the age range. So this is 1 million, 2 million, 3 million years ago, okay? Now for each cave, we've dated the evidence inside the cave. So what's the maximum age of the evidence and the minimum age of the evidence, okay? So we've plotted these on here. So this green area is all a period of time when Giganto was around, and this bit here is a period when Giganto wasn't around. So from this, we can determine exactly when it drops out the fossil record, which I call the extinction window, because it's not going to be just one time period. It's going to be a period of time where it starts to disappear from lots of different caves. And that is 295 to 215,000 years ago. Now, why is that important? If we know exactly when it went extinct, we can start looking at the causes, because then all we have to do then is go to the environmental records and look right before this extinction window. What was happening in the environment right before it went extinct? And we could do this by looking at pollen. So here is a reconstruction of all the pollen records. The first section here is what we call arboreal, so lots of trees, dense forest, rainforest, lots of trees around. About 600,000 years ago, we get a change in the plant communities. We get increased seasonality, and the plant communities start to change. And you can see here, so it's not a deterioration of the forest, but the plant communities are definitely changing. Then we get the extinction window, and then after the extinction window, then the actual forests start to decay, and we get non-arboreal, so non-trees, things like shrubs and ferns that then start to take over this forested space. So definitely something was happening here in the change of the plant communities. So now we know when they went extinct, and we know what was happening in the environment. Now we can look at how Giganto was behaving. And we can do this by looking at their teeth. Now, you might not know this, but your teeth tell you a lot about yourself. So you can't hide anything from teeth. Everything, every way you live, what you drink, if you're female, how long you breastfed for, everything is recorded in your teeth. So we have this technique called trace element analysis, and we look at strontium and calcium. Don't worry too much about this, but I want to show you these teeth here are very early Giganto, about 2 million years ago. Can you see this lovely, strong banding within the teeth? This is showing us that there's really high diversity in food sources, and the species was really flourishing. It was really healthy. If we look at Giganto 300,000 years ago, it's a very different story. Look at the teeth. There's still color changes, so there's still strontium and calcium in there, but no banding. Look how diffuse all the colors are. This is showing us that there's a lower diversity of food sources and indicating that the species was under chronic stress. So it's not surviving very well, and it's passing stress on to all its generations. So it was really struggling at about 300,000, and that's when we know it went extinct. And so our final contestant in the race for survival is modern humans. I don't have a picture board for modern humans, or Giganto, because obviously it's too big. But you know what Homo sapiens look like. Now, Homo sapiens were very good at adapting, and I have a great site that really shows their adaptation and survival capabilities. And this is a site called Tampaling Cave in northern Laos. Now, this site is a very extensive cave. You can see it's beautiful. It's big, steep entrance coming down and really deep, 7 or 8 meters of sediments at the bottom here. The cave itself looks like this. So we've got the top of the Coutts mountain here. This is the cave, and this is down the bottom here. There's a big rock shelter down the bottom. Now, what happens is everything that was on the top of the mountain, so if modern humans were living there at that time, everything from there would get washed into the cave, and that's how the sediments then accumulate, containing all the evidence. Now, this is important for later interpretations. So originally, we found a skull and a mandible, which is the jawbone. And when we found it, everyone was like, it's a wash-in cave. Everything just washes in. It's just a big mess of stuff just washed in, and it's not very old, and it's not very significant. So that's pretty much the reaction we got when we presented this evidence. So we had a really, really tough job to try and establish this as a valid site, and that this was actually old bones. And then, as we kept digging, we found more. So we found the top of the skull here. Top part of the skull, we found a chin bone. Getting deeper and deeper, we found a rib bone. And then another part of the skull, and then an arm bone as well. So this is going from about 2.5 meters down to nearly 8 meters. And every meter, we're finding new evidence. So there's no way this is just a big dump of stuff. There's definitely some antiquity here, and definitely quite meaningful. So what we did was to try and date the site. Now, in the old days, you could go to a site and have one radiocarbon age, and you have a chronology. But these days, that doesn't happen anymore. You have multiple dating techniques all applied, because each technique has different limitations. And so you put them all together to try and make it a little bit more robust. So down the bottom here, we have the age. Ka just means 1,000 years ago. And here we have depth. So this is the surface going down to 7, 8 meters down the bottom here. So you can see we started with radiocarbon dating, and then we did some luminescence dating. But then the signals started to get too old for that technique, so we had to change to another technique down the bottom. But you can see we have over 80,000 years of sediment accumulation at this site, and we have the first skull that we found about 46,000. So 46,000 to 80,000, we've got nearly 40,000 years in which humans were living and surviving in this area. Now, just to give you some context, originally people thought that humans didn't get to Southeast Asia till about 40,000. And even when they got there, they thought that they were living in coastal areas because we're very good at sort of scavenging around for coastal resources. These sites that I'm showing you here, they're all inland and they're all upland regions in dense rainforest conditions. Now, 40,000, we know that humans could live in rainforests. We didn't know that they could do it at 80,000. So you probably think, oh, but rainforests are nice places to live. Yeah, there's lots of food and there are lots of water and they're great. But I don't know if you've ever been in a rainforest. There's lots of food, but it's all up in the top canopy. There's nothing on the ground at all because there's no light down there, so nothing grows. So everything, all the food sources are all in the top canopy. So to survive in a rainforest, you need skills. You need a toolkit to be able to survive. And so modern humans, we know, developed skills that they could use. Slingshot, thank you. Completely went from my head. Slingshots and spears as well from wood. So they developed these skills so that they could survive in these rainforest environments. So we knew they did that. We just didn't know they could do it at 80,000 years ago, almost double what we expected. So we see this evidence of early inland rainforest survival in Tampaling in northern Laos. We also see it in Fuyang Cave in southern China, in Lida Asia in western Sumatra, and they even were able to cross the watery expanse all the way to Australia, to northern Arnhem Land and a site called Majabibi, which has been dated to 65,000 years ago. Now, this is just showing how incredibly adaptable modern humans are. They can survive in often challenging and incredibly harsh environments and survive. You can see the other species, they all struggled with climate changes. They all struggled with challenging environments. They struggle when their food source is not there, but not Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens are able to adapt and survive. So if we look at primates as a whole, we can see that some primates are really resilient and some are really vulnerable. So let's just have a look as a summary what we've got here. So Gigantopithecus, very vulnerable. It chose an evolutionary path which made it vulnerable, and when it couldn't adapt when the forests changed. So what's happening is, with primates, usually if their most primary food source is not available, they have what's called a fallback food. And Giganto's fallback food is like bark off trees and twigs, anything it can find on the forest floor. It couldn't adapt and move into more open environments and find other food sources. And this is why the population got more and more stressed, and then you can see what eventually happened. Very vulnerable. Same for Homo erectus. Remnants of its archaic fauna that it used to hunt got reduced to sort of refugia locations in Java. And then some environmental event occurred, I'm not sure what it was yet, and it couldn't compete with this sort of encroaching rainforest and different type of fauna with different skill set, different toolkits that it just didn't have. And then it also went extinct. Homo floresiensis, also very vulnerable. We know not because of volcanic eruptions, but potentially competition with Homo sapiens. We don't know how much interaction there was. But also there was that vegetation collapse about 60,000 years ago, which really could have caused it a lot of problems. So what does this mean for modern day primates? Well, we've got modern gorillas, mountain gorillas, sorry. They are incredibly vulnerable. They are locked into a very specific ecosystem, very much like Giganto. And it chose that evolutionary path and it can't get out of it now. So it's very, very dependent on its ecosystem. It can't really adapt. So we have to be super careful about mountain gorillas. However, orangutans are actually a lot more resilient. And we know this because when we did the Giganto study, we also looked at orangutans, what orangutans were doing while Giganto was struggling. And we found that orangutans are incredibly resilient. They can move out of, when the plant communities start to change, they can move to more open environments. Their fallback food is a lot more nutritious, so they will eat flowers, they will eat shoots, they'll even eat insects and maybe the odd lizard. They can just adapt and eat different things that helps them to survive. And then the king of all resilience is obviously Homo sapiens. We have what's called adaptive plasticity. That just means that we can occupy any environmental niche. We're very good at adapting to different circumstances. So we can live in forested environments. We can live inland, in upland regions. We can live in coastal regions. We can live in desert regions. We can cross big watery expanses to get to other locations. So we are incredibly good at adapting. Okay, so why were we better at adapting? We weren't bigger, we weren't stronger, or more agile than any of those species that went extinct. But we chose an evolutionary path that allowed us to adapt in the face of climate change and allowed us to develop a more superior toolkit so that we had the skills, we had the toolkit to be able to survive in often really harsh environments. So primates can be vulnerable or resilient to these environmental stresses and sometimes interactions with other species. So what we're actually looking at here is looking at why certain species go extinct to help us define their unique stories, and then working out how we sit within that story to understand why we're all still here. So this interpretation has implications for how we go about conservation of our modern day primates. So mountain gorillas versus orangutans. Orangutans, we know, are much more resilient, but to a point. If we keep destroying even the open habitats they can move into, then there's going to be a problem. So obviously, that's good to know, and we can obviously use that in our strategies. So if we compare our survival with past unresolved extinctions, it helps us define our own resilience. And I believe that this is our key to survival in the future. We have some amazing, not amazing, challenging environments and futures to think about. And if we can harness or reharness or safeguard this resilience that we have, then we have a good chance of survival. Thank you. Just before questions, I just want to mention, if you want to know more about this kind of stuff, as David was mentioning, I love making science accessible to everyone. That's my Twitter I used to call it, handle. But also, if you like podcasts, we've got Leakey Foundation, we've got conversations with Richard Feidler. I know everyone's a big fan of Richard Feidler. And that's up on Spotify, so you can have like, we've got some nice videos there on Vimeo, really short, nice for short attention spans, on Homo erectus and modern humans. And I also have a website here called wheregiantsroamed.com. And you can go and have a look at all the excavations in China. I've got like 3D images and things that you can really feel like you're part of the excavation and have a look at what's really going on. So please welcome to any of that. Thank you.
We have time for questions. I think
we have some runners. Oh, there we go. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. I appreciate it's extraordinarily lucky to find skeletons of,
Yes.
50,000, 300,000 years ago in any case.
Yes.
But with Florey, the Hobbit,
Yeah,
wasn't it, isn't it sort of, doesn't it beg a belief that it was buried in a sediment 50,000 years ago, that eroded away, another sediment buried it 16,000 years ago, and it survived that, however long that gap may have been.
Yeah.
I mean, is that why there's only one?
I think so. So with the skeleton in Flores, the biggest problem for archaeologists, I would say, is actually I had a picture of it, but Komodo dragons. Komodo dragons in Indonesia I've been to Venture Island and watched them eat. They can eat bone, hide, hair, everything. I saw one big male have a skull of a deer, throw it in the air and just eat the whole thing. So they are amazing. So they're great to look at, but they are not great for archaeologists who want to find bones, because unfortunately, if a carcass dies in the landscape, it just gets eaten by komodos, so we never see the bones. And yeah, so to find this skeleton where we found it was amazing. And the only reason we found it was because we reconstructed the environment, and there was actually a pool of water over one side of the cave. So she died, we're not sure how or why, could have just been old age. And she slid into this pool, and it was very silty. So it completely covered the whole skeleton, and that's why it was preserved. And we know this because when we originally found it, we found everything apart from the arm bones. So we excavated behind it, and she obviously slipped down like that, and the arm bones were in the next sector across. So we went in and found the arm bones.
This is also a question about floresiensis.
Yeah.
Since is it just the one specimen?
Yeah.
Then.
Oh, no, sorry. There's one whole skeleton, and then another mandible, and then we've also got an arm bone from another sector. Well, when we found that arm bone, we had no idea what it was because it didn't make sense. But when we found the skeleton, then we kind of made a bit more sense.
Okay. My question was gonna be how you know it's like that's the actual size of the species overall, or if it's just one specimen with like some sort of genetic
abnormality. So we do have the
abnormality.
two mandibles, and the LB1, which is the whole skeleton that we found. We also have another one called LB6, which is the other mandible, and LB1 is actually the basketball player of the Hobbit family, because the other one is actually smaller. So we actually think that the whole skeleton is actually slightly larger than the other one. So yeah, they're all to the same scale. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, so how much investigation has there been into the use of tools and the potential role of tools within, specifically to Homo sapiens, the really good adaptability that we have, particularly compared to the tool development stages of those other species, at which point they went extinct?
Yeah, so we're definitely not the only species that uses tools.
Yeah.
Obviously, from Homo habilis, the tool maker, and then Homo erectus, they all have their own sort of stone tool technologies that they use. And what we see from non-humans is that these tools became a lot more refined and a lot more elegant and a lot more specific to the jobs that they were doing. So if you look at early, we've got some Hobbit stone tools here, much more crude, kind of not really designed so much for tasks, kind of designed for everything. And then modern humans really developed this toolkit, and they started even doing, decorations and art and all these things that we define as modern modernity. So it's really interesting to see how they took the skills and they developed them to their tasks.
Yeah, so I suppose just the follow-up kind of question that I've got on that is more, to what extent does the more advanced tool use of Homo sapiens play, considering the environmental changes that cause the extinctions of those other species? Like, is it so much the environment that's at play, or is it perhaps our better use or more refined use and more advanced use and development of tools?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the tools come into it, but I think it's just the actual being able to adapt to environmental conditions. So if you can't get your preferred food source, you're used to living at the coast. Humans are good at just going, okay, we'll go inland and we'll go and find some other food sources. We're very good at adapting to the situation, and then saying, oh, I need to do this task. I'll develop a tool for that. Like other species are not very good at that. They've developed their tools and they're not very good at adapting it to different situations.
Yeah, okay.
That, I think, is the key to that's kind of what you're
Yeah, yeah, no.
Thank you for the talk. I'm just interested, you're researching in the area of Southeast Asia. Are you perhaps going to relate that to Aborigines in Australia, how we arrived here and how they arrived here, I should say?
I have done some work in Australia, and I've looked at rock art dating in the Kimberley and other things like that. I did a lot of travelling when I was younger in Southeast Asia, so I do love being in Southeast Asia. And since I've started working in China, it's just so much to do. I just can't even, like a whole career's worth of caves to look at.
Okay, so basically the many tribes that have come to Australia, perhaps considering that and how things happen in Australia, how the Aborigines came to Australia? Sorry, how the many tribes that have come to Australia, the Aboriginal tribes, are you perhaps maybe will consider thinking how that happened and how they originated and where they originated?
So obviously, as we are looking at Homo sapiens travelling through Southeast Asia, they're all en route to Australia. So as we are finding these species, they are all ancestors to the species that ended up travelling across to Macquarie and then dispersing down into Australia. It's a huge antiquity, and it's incredible how much of a toolkit they already had when they arrived, which is fantastic. You know, we've always been sold this whole idea about Europe and how amazing the rock art is and how advanced and everything. But when you're looking at what they were doing at 65,000 in Macquarie with decoration and the tools that they were making, it's incredible to understand how long this antiquity has been in Australia.
The idea, I think, is that it was a spreading out from Africa, wasn't it? About 70,000 years ago or something?
The dating that we've got shows that they're already in Southeast Asia by 70, so that pushes back the arrival at the exit out of Africa much further as well. So every time you find older sites, it kind of pushes back when they originally came out of Africa.
A question here, and there's another one there.
Hi. How many years have you been discovering the bones for?
How many years have I been discovering the bones?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started the Hobbit work that I did in Flores. That was over 20 years ago, and that was my PhD. So that's when I first started. So I've been doing it a while. Lots of caving, lots of getting dirty, and finding really cool stuff. So yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm doing a Bachelor of Commerce, so I have no idea what's going on, but I enjoyed the talk. But I'm just wondering, when you say that we're just better at adapting, is that like the evolutionary path that we take, our bodies are able to handle these different food sources, or like is it a mentality thing? Like what is it that made our branch just able to adapt better?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that answer. All I can find out is the evidence that we could adapt. But yeah, I think it's all to do with cognitive development. I mean, if you look at some of the species that I've been talking about here, we originally thought that there was a really strong link between brain size and intelligence. So the bigger the brain, the more intelligent, and we ate a lot more meat and we became much more intelligent, and that's how we advanced. But then the Hobbit comes along, and she was displaying, quite intelligence as in making stone tools, hunting Komodo dragon, which just blows my mind. I've seen a Komodo dragon, I would not take one on, especially if I was a meter tall. But yeah, so showing really, intelligent traits, and yet had the same size of a chimpanzee's brain. So it's kind of like all our understanding is kind of breaking down these conceptions we have about humans and intelligence. But as to yet, we don't know why Homo sapiens are so good at adapting. But I think my message is more about we are really good, and I think a lot of people think, it's just, I can't live without my phone, I can't live without my car, and all this kind of stuff. But I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for how amazingly good we are at adapting to the environment.
Thank you.
I might just, sorry, I see some mics here, I was just going to steal it on the way back.
Okay, no
You've probably seen kind of the latest DNA research from, I think it was University of Utah and Latrobe, looking at DNA sequencing and mitochondrial and kind of drawing back the time frames because of the Neanderthal component in the DNA in Aboriginals and so on to probably under 50,000 years. So I'm just interested in your commentary on that. Obviously with C14 dating and other forms of dating, you've got quite a big variation in time frames. So how do you correlate that to this latest DNA research?
Yeah, so for everyone else that doesn't know, the ancient DNA is just looking at the DNA from past hominins. And what it's kind of showing is that potentially there's the population expansion in Australia is no older than 50,000. So obviously we have evidence of Homo sapiens arriving in sites like Majabibi at 65,000. So what I try to do is have a look at what the ancient DNA is saying, and the paleoproteomics as well, the ancient proteins, and try and rectify that with what we find on the ground, with the hard evidence of what we found on the ground. And so the way I look at it is, there was an early arrival at 65,000 at Majabibi. It just means that it wasn't successful, as in they arrived and then they died out. So they haven't contributed to the Aboriginal gene pool that we see at 50,000. So there would have been earlier what we call unsuccessful migrations. But just because they were unsuccessful doesn't mean they didn't get there, and it was still an amazing achievement.
Okay, great.
I was just wondering, when you first said that they found the 12 Homo erectus in the one spot,
Yes.
my brain instantly went to like, oh, it must be a burial ground,
Yes.
before you said it was a flood.
So there was originally people thinking that it was like some sort of cannibal situation where they were using the skulls and eating them out or something. There was some like crazy ideas about what it actually meant. But really what it is just that they had been in the river and been rolled in the river, and the most fragile part of your skull is all this bit. The most robust part is the skull cap. So if you roll it in a river, all of this part will break off, but the skull cap will remain. So that's pretty much the idea. But yes, it does do look like that. But it just looks like there was a lot on the landscape, and it's all accumulated in this one spot.
Yeah.
Because it got caught in the little jam.
I was just wondering, though, if, like, they think that Homo erectus maybe was emotionally developed enough that they believed in ever burying the dead or anything? And if so, would you then have to factor that into, like, if they're digging them a few meters into the ground to bury their dead?
Yeah,
would that
so there's
affect
absolutely no evidence
archaeological?
of burial. It's definitely accumulated in like a river terrace. So if there was burial, we would see the burial ground, and we could look at the sediments under a microscope and really work out that it was a burial. But this is definitely just a river deposit. So it's been accumulated in the river, and then we just found it. But that's why there was such a density. I mean, they were finding thousands of fossils in this one part. Not just erectus, but all the fauna as well.
Question?
Yeah. Hello. Oh.
Very much. Yeah.
I read in the paper recently about your discovery of the very old bones supersedes for example, what they found in Seerfontein in Rustenburg in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask you, so I thought that was the original finding, and now you've come up with the more advanced.
Do you mean the Gigantopithecus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, so Gigantopithecus is usually just in China, and so we found the earliest Giganto.
No, but I'm talking about the Seerfontein caves. Have you not?
Yes, yeah. In South
have you
Africa.
been to
Yes,
South
yeah,
Africa?
Yeah.
To the caves? Yeah. And I thought that was also bones of
Erectus?
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Erectus. Yeah. But probably not the younger end, probably the older end of erectus.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So definitely would have evolved in Africa, and then at some point would have exited out of Africa. We do find a really big concentration of Homo erectus in Java. We're not quite sure why just Java, but there's about 7 or 8 Homo erectus sites in Java. And the youngest one that we found is this Nangdong site.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, definitely right about erectus.
Thank you.
With the teeth, how exactly do the bands show the different food sources?
Yeah, so not so much the food sources, it's more about how developed the bands are, so that when you are eating a wide diversity of food, then you're going to lay down a lot more calcium and strontium into your teeth, and it comes out as much clearer banding. when you've got more limited food sources, you're not really eating, you're eating bark off the side of the tree or some branches or something, then the banding is not so clear because you're not laying down as much calcium.
So it's to do with there's more banding means there's a wider variety.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I was just wondering if you've done much work on Denisovans, or if you know, has there been any evidence of Denisovans found in like Southeast Asia?
Yes, it's good. I should have mentioned Denisovans as well. Yes, we in the site that I was talking about, Trampoline, just down from Trampoline, there's a site called Cobra Cave, and we actually found a Denisovan tooth. So if anyone else doesn't know, Denisovans are a species that is well known from a cave in Russia called Denisova Cave. And it's the weirdest species because we don't really know very much about what they look like. We only found like a little finger bone and a few teeth and a few other little tiny parts. But we know everything about its ancient DNA. So we know the whole DNA sequence of Denisovans. So we know everything about what they were about. We just don't know what they look like. Whereas, everything else, erectus, everyone, we know exactly what they look like, we just don't have any clue about their DNA. Because it's very hard to reconstruct that. But because of obviously Denisova Cave in Russia, the ground is pretty frozen, so it's great preservation of DNA. So we have actually found a tooth in a cave called Cobra Cave, just down the road from Trampoline. And yeah, definitely Denisovan, which shows that very similar time that they found this stuff in northern Tibet. So it was adapting to, high altitude environments at the same time it was living in sort of tropical rainforest environments as well. So again, high range of adaptability.
Thank you.
So then we have our last question here, and then I'm sure Kira will be happy to answer questions from down here later.
All right.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm doing my Bachelor of Archaeology, and I'm gonna graduate next year. Yay! I know that with identifying human relatives, it's mainly done through the skulls because of how similar they are to us and all that stuff. If no skulls are present, how would you identify a skeleton as a primate or a human relative?
Yeah, so without a skull, you can also look at the bones, but it's sometimes not that diagnostic. The best thing is teeth. So you have a juncture between the dentine and the enamel in teeth, and the shape of that can tell you which species it is.
Okay, cool.
Incredible. It's very hard science. It's very difficult to do, but they take CT scans of the teeth, and they look at this junction between the enamel and dentine, and the kind of shapes and the way it presents itself can often tell you what species it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All about the teeth. I have a colleague in Southern Cross University, and I call him the tooth whisperer because he dates the teeth, he identifies the teeth, and he gets all the trace elements from the teeth and all that stuff. And I actually gave him, my son's just up there, I gave him one of his teeth, and he actually opened it up, and he doesn't know this. Obviously not still in his mouth, it has come out. And I gave him one of his teeth, and he had a look at, he could tell me how long I was breastfeeding for, and then we calibrated that against how long I told him we breastfed, and it was actually spot on. So yeah, pretty amazing. Sorry, Carl, I didn't tell you about that.
So let's thank Kira once again for a fabulous talk. And so our next Discover lecture on the 21st of October will be presented by Associate Professor Amy Kane on microbial genetics and how that can improve our world. So do, if you can, please come along to that one as well. We'd love to see you.
Can I just say one thing? Down the front here, we have a range of skulls. Please come down and have a look. You're welcome to pick them up. Just be aware that the mandibles come off. The jawbones come off. So if you pick one up, go, oh, I've broken it. You haven't broken it. Okay? But they are obviously